Liberty Doll is the host of the eponymous show on YouTube, a liberty-minded news program featuring discussion and witticisms with a little punk rock and vintage pin-up flair. Her channel has over 90,000 subscribers and has received over 5 million views. Liberty Doll, welcome to the Games and Writers Show. When you look at demographics, it does appear that a majority of young people tend to skew more liberal. Why do you think that is?
Oh, goodness. Well, how much time do I have to answer that question?
As much as you need.
I think a lot of it has to do with the school systems, for one, especially public education. I have found that I went to private school, and going to private school, I got very limited classes and information about civics. But I know that that is even more limited in a lot of public schools. I know that then going on to college, even, 10 years ago or so, there was a lot of it's almost forced down your throat of like, back then it was Obama and it was like, okay, well, everyone votes for Obama and this is why. And they never talked about other possible options. And I don't know if that's just a mechanism of the fact that I live in the state of Massachusetts, that nothing else was discussed, or if it's like that everywhere. We kind of are in our own little bubble here. And I think, unfortunately, there's also a big sense of entitlement in a lot of the younger generations. And finally, I think it's just a nature of the fact that young people haven't been around in the world for very long, and so they don't necessarily always understand how things work.
Right. So to what do you attribute your having a different point of view? Was it the private school, or was there something else? Was there a moment when you were like, wait a minute, I actually don't agree with this?
Oh, goodness. Private school, I mean, there was an element of it there, a little tiny bit just in, there was this whole controversy with the school newspaper and a protest and petition that I may or may not have started around the uniforms. But also, I remember in one of my history classes, it was U.S. history, and it was an election year, and we were talking about the different candidates. And in this particular class, the teacher talked about, Republicans and Democrats and third parties. And I remember that she sort of told us all in this hushed voice that she was a libertarian, but we couldn't tell anyone about that or she would get in trouble. And at the time, I had no idea what that meant, but it was sort of something that stuck with me. And I was like, wow, like, why would someone get in trouble for what they believe? And she had kind of explained a little bit of it, what it meant, and it seemed entirely reasonable at the time. And then flash forward to grad school, and it really just was a point in time where I was living in a really dangerous neighborhood that I didn't know was so bad when I had moved into it. And, I'm this young woman in this really dangerous neighborhood, and I want to be able to protect myself. And I find out that the little pepper spray that my grandmother gave me to keep me safe while I'm in the dregs of downtown Boston is technically illegal in this state. And I'm like, well, why is that? And at the same time, I met the man who is now my husband, and he started talking politics and self-defense and sort of questioning some of the narrative that we have locally in Massachusetts. And then I just started asking a lot of questions until I reached a point where I was lying awake in bed at night, terrified about all the atrocities that the government was committing. It just sort of snowballed from
there. So you're young, living in Massachusetts. Do you ever feel alienated in any way?
Yes. Very alienated, actually. So I had just, before talking with you, I had been speaking with someone else online, and he asked the same question. Yes, very much so. you sort of have to, if you are not even just a Democrat, but a Democrat socialist, if you are not a socialist in the state of Massachusetts, you are very much demonized. And there was recently a study done, I forget who did it, but they got a whole bunch of people together and they polled them about their views of Democrats and Republicans, the major two parties, and found that Massachusetts is one of the worst states for Democratic prejudice against Republicans and really
Hmm.
against anyone else. So there's that component. I've lost friendships. I've lost relationships with family members. The whole reason I started Liberty Doll was to get things off of my personal Facebook page because it was doing so much damage. Unfortunately, I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I have my own private practice in the state, and I'll have people come into my office sometimes and talk about how, oh, they would kill someone if they found out they were a Republican, or oh, I would never be able to have a relationship with this person anymore. Oh, I would stop soliciting this business if I found out that they
Hmm.
didn't support Bernie Sanders. Um, so there is always this element of hiding.
Yeah. And I don't know. I find it, I almost feel like this should go without saying, but it clearly doesn't. That I find that so unfortunate because that is not a country in which I think if you were to ask them directly, they would want to live in. And yet there's something about it that, I consider myself pretty moderate. I have views that are more liberal and views that are more conservative. So election times are difficult for me. But
Yes.
But just having said that, it's just a matter of once we start endangering the right to believe as you want to believe, that to me, and I don't think this is conspiratorial in nature. I think that's a slippery slope, and I
It
feel like
is.
we're kind of on it. And it's odd to me that historically, liberals may have, you would think, have a history of supporting things like free speech when Berkeley was kind of, that's back in the 60s, that's kind of what was happening there. And now there are certain people who cannot even go speak at Berkeley without
Right.
fear of getting beaten up and killed.
Mhm.
And that's just, to me, that's a travesty based on, because I think like classical liberalism has some things to offer. It's not a perfect
Oh,
system, but
absolutely.
as opposed to what's happening now, that is not classic liberalism.
No. No.
And it's gotten a little nutty, and it's sad. It's really sad to me.
I think that actually libertarianism is much closer to classical liberalism now than actual liberalism is. And I've been told, and I would like to believe that this sort of, PC culture, this sort of war on what you can and can't say and what is offensive and what isn't offensive. I've been told that most people don't actually believe that and that it is just a very, very loud minority on social media and on some of the news programs. But when you see it so prevalent in things like social media, in things like I saw in one of your previous episodes, you had talked about sensitivity writers for books.
Right.
It's like, okay, well,
It's a real thing.
it's supposedly a vocal minority, but I think that they're so vocal that they drown everyone else out.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I don't know, I'm still, I guess, relatively young. Ignore the gray in the beard. But I've lived long enough to see some swings of the pendulum, and I can't help but think maybe this is just the idealist or the optimist in me, but to feel that at some point, people are going to be like, you know what, enough. Like how far can we actually go? How far will we allow ourselves to go? And maybe that's a scary question to consider. I don't know, but my hope is that at some point people will just realize some of the insanity of it. I don't know.
Well, I can't imagine things can really go much farther without the party sort of eating its own. We've seen that a couple times recently already with different things here and there. The Women's March getting shut down because it was too white in one particular white neighborhood, for example. That was controversy that came up in January. Things like Kevin Hart not being allowed to host, was it the Oscars? Whatever stupid award show because of, some joke that he had made in like a stand-up routine years ago, things like that. Unfortunately, it's sort of becoming this situation, I think, where if you don't hit off enough intersectional check boxes, you're no longer good enough in your free game. And eventually, if that keeps happening, there's not going to be anyone left.
Right.
So, I mean, I think, there is no choice to kind of try to swing it back to the other direction.
Right. I mean, that's sort of related to an argument I've made to some friends who have really pushed for, censorship of like the current administration and whatnot. And to me, like, regardless of how you feel about it, that's a bad idea because, regimes and administrations change. And if we limit one in that way, then we have set a precedent to some other regime down the road to do the same thing. We would have done it to ourselves. That's actually my biggest fear. And that's the reason why the amendments are there. That's why the Bill of Rights exists, to protect against that sort of thing. But anyway.
Right. I mean, exactly. And, plus if you were to censor the current administration, you wouldn't have so many great memes.
Yes. Yes, the internet would not be the same. That is for sure. That is for sure. So, speaking of the administration, with the Mueller investigation finally at an end, do you think it's at all strange that there seems that there are people who are kind of bemoaning the fact that the president was cleared of collusion? Because it seems to me like it would be good news for everybody. Like, I'm not pretending to be a huge fan of the president, by the way, but to me, it's a good idea. It's a good thing that he's not a traitor to his country. I don't know. Right. It just seems like that's bad news.
Yeah, I was scrolling through the headlines today and I saw all these headlines of like, oh, Congress is putting out a subpoena for the report, and what is Barr hiding? Did Russia get to him? And it's like, oh my goodness, we're not actually living in a fiction novel. This is not what's happening. I mean, I suppose it's possible, but my God, I mean, who isn't hiding something if this is the way that we're going? Like, how far are we going to go?
Yeah, it was just
are we just never going to believe anyone ever again?
It's getting, well, it depends on what, if they agree with you or not. That's the problem. Right. But it was just funny because, Mueller was just a god and a saint. And then the instant it came out, they're like, he's getting on it. He's never believed him in the first place. Weren't they even
selling like Mueller swag and stuff like that at one point? And now people don't know what to do with it?
I think there were Mueller shrines in people's living rooms. Like, oh, dear Mueller. Yeah, it was nuts. But anyway, so you no doubt have your share of trolls online. We've kind of talked about that. Does this criticism ever bother you, or does it just kind of, I don't know, strengthen your resolve to keep doing what you're doing? How do you deal with it?
Well, sometimes I ignore it. Sometimes I actually get apologetic when people are like, oh, like, there was last year I had some videos where like my lenses had gotten scratched, and I had people that were commenting. They're like, oh, you should clean your glasses. You shouldn't be on YouTube if you can't even clean your glasses. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. It's actually the reflective coating that's scratched, and I'm looking at getting a new pair. And so sometimes I fall into that trap, which is not great. And then sometimes it's the people that insult my intelligence that get to be the most. Or the people that come on and they like have a comment to make about like my makeup or something like that. And I'm like, this is completely irrelevant to what I'm saying. Like, right. I'll have people that are like, you wear too much red, so I'm not listening to you because I can't believe anything you say. What?
I'm trying to follow that logic. That syllogism isn't ringing a bell for me.
It's bizarre, but some of them I'm getting better at ignoring some of the trolls. Some of them, my other subscribers are nice enough to white knight for me, so I don't have to. But sometimes it just comes down to, finding a friend or a husband and being like, saying to my husband, like, oh my God, someone said this to me today. And then like the really good ones sometimes I'll put up on Twitter
Oh, that's
and
good.
just put like a bunch of like 100 emojis along with it. And then that'll
That's
get me some laughs. So it all
yeah,
depends.
yeah, that's good. No, the insulting of the intelligence is a good one. I remember there was a debate on Facebook. Going
Hmm.
back to Facebook, and I unwisely got involved. Just briefly
Oh
posted a
no.
comment, and yeah, I know I fell into the trap. I always tell
Oh,
myself I'm not going to, but it was just such a dumb thing that I was just like, you think I'm going to say this, and then everyone will see how wrong they are, and we'll all be friends. Well, it didn't work out that way because the guy
no.
came back and because he had been talking with another person, so I probably shouldn't have gotten involved. I was just like, how about blah blah. And
Hmm.
he's like, well, you're clearly not intelligent enough to be involved in this conversation, so I'm going to ignore your comment.
Ooh.
So it's just funny because you can't really imagine somebody doing that in real life. No. So two people
Right.
talking on the street and you walk up, you maybe know them both a little bit, and you're like, hey, how you doing? What you guys talking about? And you're like, here's my opinion. They look at you like, you're an idiot. No, I mean, you go have some beers and hash. I mean, it's just, I don't know, something weird about the internet turns people into
Yeah.
their worst
It,
selves.
and I don't know how people can. I mean, it is the I never say that word. It's the factor of like being able to be anonymous, but sometimes I because of my position of being a therapist, I kind of pride myself on conflict resolution skills and being able to be empathic and say things diplomatically and understand the other person's perspective. But like, so I'll like just say something and it'll be really nice. And then someone will just come back and be like, oh, you dumb, da 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 da, you dumb bimbo. And I'm like, but I what? Sorry for
So
being nice.
it's it's not funny, but it is. It's just so. I mean, you have to laugh at it at some point. So
I mean that I just had that happen to me last night on Twitter. There was someone that was commenting, and it wasn't even about their argument. I saw that in their bio section it said psychologist, and then it said conservatism is a mental disorder, and I was like, oh no, that violates the APA guidelines. So like I typed back to them. I was like, hey, just so you know, you might want to change this because that violates APA guidelines and in this section, this part, and da 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 da. And then they wrote back telling me that I was a sick, horrible person. And I was like, I was just trying to be nice so that you don't get in trouble.
right, just trying to protect your license. Sorry. Yeah, my wife is a psychologist, and she has similar reactions to things. Like just like she doesn't like. Oh, you gotta fix. Like no,
Yeah,
you don't gotta fix. So
yeah.
it's funny.
Something we all have to learn.
Yeah. Who's your favorite Democrat?
Oh, well, like ironically or for real?
Oh, I don't know. You choose.
Oh, man. Well, like Yang has a strong meme game. I don't agree with 75% of the things that he has to say, but like the internet meme game is pretty strong. Otherwise, I mean, I guess he's not officially a Democrat, but oh, is it Howard Schultz, the Starbucks guy?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. I
Right.
mean, I mean, I agree with some of the stuff Tulsi Gabbard has to say, and then some of it is like, oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no one really.
Yeah. Fair enough. So, what advice would you? Well, I should set that up by saying that we have one of the largest pools of candidates on the Democratic side
Yes.
for 2020 that I've ever seen. What advice would you give to them running? If you were on
What
their
if
campaigns and they're like, Liberty Doll, I need some advice or I'm going to lose, what would you tell them?
I'd probably tell them to calm down a little bit. Um, and just, stop catering to the I don't even know. Maybe stop catering to that possibly very loud minority of people that are going with the PC movement. I mean, a lot of the candidates right now, it seems like they're trying to like out Democrat each other. You know, it's
Yeah.
like who can be the most liberal and have like the craziest, wildest policies out there. And Joe Biden, I don't know if he's officially running yet or not. I know he sort of accidentally said something that one time and everyone ran with it, but now he's having his sort of like Me Too moment that's being explained away as just having a tactile style
Right.
of politics.
I watched his video earlier today. Yeah.
Um, he was certainly the one that I was the least scared of, to
Right.
be honest. And in the polls, if you're not counting the people that are officially running, he does have the highest numbers, and I think that does speak a lot to the moderates. But I don't know if he doesn't run, the next in line as far as numbers goes is Bernie Sanders, which is a little bit frightening. I believe that he believes everything that he says. Uh, I don't know if it's necessarily always mathematically sound,
Yeah.
but so yeah, I guess my advice would be to like calm down and I don't know, just don't get in this mud flinging, out liberaling each other contest because it's not helpful. It makes everyone look ridiculous.
Yeah. I think actually that for the Democrat side, Joe Biden would be a pretty solid choice
Hmm.
in terms of electability. Like he has the name recognition, which is probably why he's polling so high at this early date because
Right.
everybody just knows who he is. But I think in terms of positions, I do think he is more moderate. Like he's just been
Hmm.
around so long. The thing about Joe Biden is that I don't think he comes across this way, but I think he's actually fairly clever.
Hmm.
And he understands how to play the roles it needs to play.
Right.
So there are some things I've heard him say. I'm like, I'm not sure you really believe that because that's not something you've been working on for the past 100 years. But I find him interesting. I think it would be hilarious if he actually ran. I hope he does, just for the entertainment value.
He
You
kind of reminds me of like a really old school used car salesman.
know. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, where like, oh, you walked by and he's like, oh, let me show you this great car. And he slaps you on the back and he shakes your shoulder a little bit. I think that's what he's doing.
Yeah.
Just people don't like that anymore and
Yes.
are creeped out about it when he does it to 14-year-old children.
Well, yeah, there's always that. You're like, what do I need to do to get you in this car? So, yeah, it always reminds me of the uncle at holidays. Everybody kind of like, okay, yeah, it's Uncle Joe. Anyway, moving
Yeah,
on.
and maybe he's a little bit tipsy and that's
Right.
why he's so touchy-feely.
Yeah, we're not really sure. Like I think he like had some pre-game drinking going on there prior to Thanksgiving or something. I don't know. But out of the pool, apart from who we might prefer to run, who do you think will end up facing Trump in 2020?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, so I mean, it could end up being Bernie Sanders, just going by his numbers and the support that he had last time. But at the same time, like it's strange because back then the establishment were like, oh hell no. They didn't let him in. I mean, they kind of did sort of what they did to Ron Paul back in 2012, I think it was, where like there was a caucus around here and they flat out wouldn't let you vote in Ron Paul at the
Mm.
caucus. They were handing out ballots pre-filled out for Mitt Romney and his people. I'm totally
Wow.
serious. And that's kind of what they did to Bernie Sanders last time, but seeing that the left as a whole, or at least as they like to tell us, has shifted even more left, that he is now sort of seen as like the norm. So it
Right.
could be entirely possible that he would get it. I don't think Elizabeth Warren would get it. She's ugh.
Mm.
Never trust a politician from Massachusetts.
Well, you would know.
I would. Yeah, I mean, I think it would probably be him or maybe Kamala Harris because right now, as far as uh, numbers for how many people are tuning in when that person's like on CNN or something, Kamala Harris, I believe, is actually at the top. So it could be
Oh,
her.
okay. Very interesting. Well, it will be interesting to watch to see if you are correct. I think you make a good argument for it, but no matter what happens, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of
Yes.
fun. So I think everybody would do well to keep their eye on your channel because I'm sure you'll be covering it as we go forward.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Yep.